couple of big hands that we can take a look at real quick. In the first one, I open up pocket kings from under the gun. The button calls and the big blind calls. 3 ways to a flop of Jack 4-3 with 2 spades and 1 heart. I bet 60. Both players make the call. Turn is a 9 of hearts, which brings in a possible backdoor flush draw. Big blind checks, and I make another bet of 180. I think I could have sized a little bit bigger here in hindsight, and rather than a 2/3 size pot, maybe closer to 75% of the pot, something along those lines. Not sure if it would have made too big of a difference, kind of results oriented, but both players call again. River's the 8 of hearts, so the backdoor flush completes. Big blind checks, I decide to check, and the button puts out a bet of $300. The big blind folds, and it's over to me. It's a pretty small bet. The bad thing is that we block the spade draw, but we don't block the heart draw with our pocket kings. So that's the downside. The upside is that it's such a cheap sizing for this size of the pot. Not super cheap, but obviously not that expensive. I'm just gonna play it as usual in these kinds of spots where I've never seen the opponent before. The price is reasonable. Hand is mediocre. It's mostly just a bluff catcher at this point, obviously, but maybe I can have some worse hands here, potentially, but not that much worse. Anyway, I shrug and call, and sure enough, he has ace-4 of hearts. Flop middle pair, turn the backdoor flush draw, gets there on the river. In this next hand, I open up pocket queens to 30 from middle position. Player on my direct left calls, and the cutoff makes it 150. Folds back to me, and pocket queens, definitely towards the top of my range here. I think you can make a case for flatting, but with all the betting going on in middle to late positions, I feel like this is definitely towards the top of my range here. So I go ahead and put in a 4-bet, and I make it 360. Folds back to the cutoff, who makes the call. Flop comes Jack 6-5 with 2 diamonds, which probably not that great of a flop. We're now losing to pocket jacks, obviously, and ace king is probably not going to call a bet anyway. So I decide on a check in this spot. My opponent looks at his cards, and then he checks back. Turn is a 7 of diamonds, which brings the 3rd diamond on board. I think I can potentially get some value here from an ace-king type hand with ace of diamonds or king of diamonds. So I go ahead and put in a bet, and I bet $310. I have somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 behind this bet. My opponent looks at my stack, and then he proceeds to jam all in for my remaining $700. Again, not that great of a spot. Not beating any value hands, obviously. Unless he happens to have a pocket tens type hand that he's just overplaying and reads my bet as weakness. That could be a little bit wishful thinking. He can for sure have some semi bluffs here though. I think he can easily have, like I said, an ace king type hand with an ace of diamonds. Once again, pocket queens I think is somewhat towards the middle of my range. I can for sure have some better hands here. I can have kings, aces, pocket jacks, maybe some flushes. With, like I said, the pre-flop action and the price that I'm getting, and having an overpair in this spot. Once again, I make the call, and river comes another diamond. He seems to reluctantly show his hand, but his hand turns out to be pocket kings. So we were drawing almost dead there, and another not that great of a spot. Perhaps I could have gotten away from it. I didn't need to 4-bet pre-flop, I guess. But that just seems a little bit on the weak side, but I don't know. I guess they just show up with it pretty regularly. The 5-10 game at the Bellagio. About 20 or 30 minutes later, I look down at pocket aces from late position, cutoff I believe. Make a standard raise to 30. Button folds, and small blind, who is the same player from the last hand, makes a 3-bet. He raises to $120. Big blind folds, and it's back on us. Happy to 4-bet here. I decide on a sizing of $260. Small blind, back in the tank. Back in the tank again. Seems like he could be getting a little sick of it. Could be a little frustrated with the developments thus far. Decides that he is sick of it, and he just jams all in there. We make the call, and we're off to see all 5 cards. We run it out, and the small blind flips over ace king we flip our hand over for the win, and we're gonna take down another decent sized pot here, very good sized pot, and things have turned around clearly. We've taken a turn from the semi-disastrous Bellagio session earlier, running very good, running aces into ace king, running ace king into either kings or queens, and just getting there on the flop no problem, etc. Things are looking up. Things are looking up here at the win. All right, so approximately a couple hours or so after that aforementioned hand, this hand develops. I look down at pocket nines from middle position, I make it 30 to go, and only the big blind calls. So heads up to a flop. Flop comes mostly favorable. Flop is king 10 9 with 2 diamonds. Bottom set on a pretty connected, pretty wet board. He checks it over to me, and I size a little bit bigger, size it to $50. Big blind decides on a check raise. He makes it $220 to go. Bit of a decision, but I think I like flatting here a little bit to keep his range wide. If he flopped a straight, then we're in so-so shape. We still have decent equity, I suppose, but kind of just want to see what happens, see what develops. So I go ahead and flat call. Turn is an offsuit king. So we fill up on the turn right away. We're now losing to king 10, but we are now beating queen jack. And my opponent continues betting. He bets $330. I think I want to keep flatting here. If he happens to have a flush draw, I don't want to fold that out. If I were to have a flush draw, or if I were to have ace king, I would just flat here as well. So I think with a flat, it keeps my range widest. That's what I decide on. I flat call once again. We're off to a river card. River brings the 8 of diamonds. Third diamond could be good news or bad news, depends on his hand, I suppose. So interesting news is that he continues betting, and he bets $500, which is the majority of his stack. He's only got maybe about $400 behind after this $500 bet. So I think if we jam here, he's gonna have to call it off with a flush. I played with this opponent before. I know his tendencies somewhat, and I don't really want to get too detailed into that, but versus some players I might flat call, but with only $400 behind, I think he's obviously gonna have to call it off with a flush. And who knows, maybe some other hands as well. So I decided on a jam. I stick it in for the last $400 that he has behind. He pretty much snap calls, so maybe a little worrisome perhaps, but I roll it over, and he gives it the head shake. Gives it the head shake, and this time, after some thought, looking back and forth at his hand and the board, mucks it. So no slow roll this time, thankfully. We've been slow rolled a couple times. Never fun to get slow rolled. We scoop another nice pot. So things are just rolling here for us at the win. Just cruising right along, flopping sets, making hands left and right, and they're holding up. No complaints. No complaints about the developments thus far. All right, last interesting hand from Friday evening. I'm in the big blind, and the gentleman on my left decides, rather than a straddle, he's just gonna raise blind at $20. As you might guess, this gentleman is kind of enjoying himself, enjoying some cocktails. Folds to the button, who puts in a 3-bet to $100, and I look down at 8-6 of diamonds in the big blinds. The gentleman on my left very blatantly shows interest in calling, kind of almost calls out of turn, realizes it's not quite his turn yet, and pulls the money back. I would normally be interested in putting in a 3-bet here in this situation without that info, and without really wanting to bring the gentleman on my left into the hand. I think a 3-bet would be great, because the button should be opening or 3-betting very wide here to take advantage of the dead money in the pot so far. But under the very exact circumstances that we're in, I decided a flat call to bring the gentleman in, and obviously he's calling, as he's already motioned his intentions before I even acted. So 3 ways to a flop. Flop comes 8-3 deuce with 2 diamonds. So we flop almost gin for our hand. I check it, gentleman on my left checks, the button bets $220. Same plan as before, trying to bring in my opponent on my left. I go ahead and make a flat call. Again, under different circumstances, I would very likely raise here, but have other plans, other ideas in mind. So after I put in a flat call, my opponent to my immediate left grabs a handful of black chips and plops them down over the line, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,000. Big blind folds immediately, and it's back to us. My opponent has maybe $500 or so beyond this 1K handful bet. The situation is about as perfect as it gets. We flop almost gin with our 8-6 of diamonds. Pair plus flush draw is always going to be in good shape against any hand. We have good equity against anything, even a set. We prefer not to be up against a set, but even still, we're going to be in okay shape. So I go ahead and jam it all in there for about 1,500 effective. Obviously, my opponent is not going anywhere. He's happy to gamble, and the board runs out offsuit king, offsuit 4. So we don't improve, but before I can even flip my hand over or announce my hand, my opponent says just a 3. So I go ahead and show my hands with my pair of 8s. My opponent shows queen 3 offsuit for a flopped middle pair. That does not improve. Pretty favorable flop. Turns out we did not need any sort of favorable turn or river card to assist. Action. Welcome to the World Series of Poker, first weekend, Friday nights at the Wynn, 1 in the morning or so. Yeah. So after all was said and done, we were into this game for $2,500. That's what I bought into the 5-10 game here at the Wynn for. Cash out for $8,737 for a pretty sweet session. I don't know if I would call this session one session or if I would call the whole day one session. I think I would call the whole day one session. If the Win was just one particular session, that would possibly be my biggest cash game win ever. But since we lost $3,000 at the Bellagio, we win $6,237 here at the 5-10 game at the Wynn. So we end up with a total profit of $3,237.